Hey everybody, welcome to Sound Bombing. I created this show for people who want to experience a radical, life-changing journey through the sounds of my diverse guests. I hope that each sound you hear on this show will strengthen your faith, encourage your dreams, and challenge you to awaken the greatness within you.
Drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We're gonna drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We're gonna drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We come to drop the bomb. Drop the bomb.
This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience.
LaMarr, Darnell Shields.
Former Ebony Fashion Fair commentator and model turned psychotherapist and media personality Dr. Jada Jackson is in the studio with me today. She is known for her transparent, practical style of communicating and teaching. Her ultimate goal is to guide women into meaningful and purposeful living, particularly in the areas of personal enrichment, emotion management, and beauty enhancement. Jade is a native of the San Francisco Bay Area and lives by the personal motto, Just Be You. She works as a clinical psychotherapist at Total Life Counseling Center in Florida and in Texas. She is a graduate of Regent University and has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Professional Communication and a Master's of Arts degree in Human Service Counseling. Jada also has a Master of Science degree in Counseling Psychology with a concentration in clinical mental health from Palm Beach Atlantic and a doctorate degree from Argosy University in Counselor Education and Supervision. Jada is licensed mental health counselor. She is also a national certified counselor and a member of the National Board of Certified Counselors. She's worked as a consultant and counseling psychologist professional for the NBA, NBPA Health Education Program, Major League Baseball Association, L'Oreal, USA, Disney, Walmart, MSNBC, Universal, Fox News, WETV, The Weather Channel, and a host of professional athletes and entertainers. Jada is the author of Be Beautiful, a powerful, packed, practical application guide to becoming a better you. Readers learn life strategies designed to address social, economical, emotional, and spiritual challenges in today's pop culture. Her latest project, Reframe, Developing the Right Perspective from Massive Success, is practical, applicable lifestyle guide for those seeking simple strategies for life challenges. In all her works, Jada encourages her readers to face fear by addressing three major areas of life: physical, spiritual, and mental. It's an honor to have you, Dr. Jada Jackson, to join me in the bomb shelter. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Dr. LaMarr. I appreciate you having me.
Now, I could have gone on forever after looking at your videos, looking at your bios, listening to your talks and all the other interviews. You know, there's so much that I could say about you, but I want the listeners to sort of hear directly from you. Let's start with this. How does a supermodel go from being a supermodel to now being a therapist and a commentator? How do you do that? Explain that to me.
Oh, man, I have to be honest, because at first, when you're young and you want to be a fashion model, you're not really thinking about plan B, right? So one thing that I know I needed to do was to have a backup plan, but I just didn't know how I was going to go about doing that. In my undergrad, I initially wanted to be a broadcast journalist, but did a couple of internships at television stations, and I was like, no, this is not what I want to do. But what I really fell into was helping people. And I was like, this just comes naturally for me. This is something that I need to look into. And I did that and went ahead and got a master's degree in counseling. And the rest is kind of history. So I always had that degree on the back burner while I was traveling with Ebony, which to me was its own PhD by itself, just traveling the world and exploring fashion and people and understanding how our culture clicks.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, and Ebony Fashion Fair was a big deal. I knew several of the makeup artists. I knew some of the models. How was that coming into becoming a model, working for Ebony Fashion?
Well, first of all, I have to say it was hands down the best job I ever had, besides the one I have right now. But it was one of those dream come true, opportunities. So I am 5'11", so that's pretty tall for a woman. Size 10 shoe, which has not always been healthy for me, because I was like 5'11".
Shoe?
I did say that. I did. So I had to. I had to make it plain. Yeah. So being that tall, I did play basketball. Loved it. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I was a Warriors fan before, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson.
I like how you had to clarify that.
Along.
I like how you had to clarify. You were a fan before all. My son cannot stand the Warriors. He's like a little lightweight hater, but I love that you said that you were a Warrior fan before all of those people.
Oh yeah, before all. I grew up with it, going to the games and playing basketball and kind of doing the whole thing. But a time came along when I had to make a decision. Do I want to go full throttle basketball, or I had a couple of different agencies kind of nipping at my heels for some modeling opportunities. So I went the direction of modeling because I was tall and a little, very thin and lanky, and, didn't really come into myself for a while. But I had a chance in 1998, 99 to visit Chicago. I got a chance to sit and talk to Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, and it was just one of those dreams come true. You walk through the Johnson Publishing Company building that's right there on Michigan Avenue. I know you know it well. Yeah. So just kind of walked in and went, wow, this is like where it all happens. And you walk down the hallways and you see all of the Ebony magazine covers with just really legendary stars. And I just kind of thought, man, I want to be a part of this. So sat and interviewed and got a call and said, well, we're going to bring you out for an official audition. And that's when it all kind of jump-started.
Wow. So right now, when you meet people, of course, many people know you maybe as a model, and they maybe know you what you're doing right now. When people ask you, what do you do, how do you answer that question?
That's the $1 million question.
It's funny. My mother still thinks I'm a teacher. Like, she does not know I left the classroom a gazillion. She said, well, I think he talks to kids and he's always somewhere. Like, she doesn't really know. So I want to know, when people ask you, what do you do? What do you say?
It's tough. I haven't mastered it yet. I really haven't mastered that yet, only because at any given time I might be in any different various arenas, and people who know me from Ebony Fashion Fair or they've seen me in Ebony Fashion Fair, it's still difficult for them to make the transition that I'm in television now, and I have a doctorate in counseling, and, it's just they can't comprehend that. But again, I'm still almost 6 feet tall, so when people see me, they're like, you must be a model. I went to the cleaners literally just the other day, and the guy's like, you're a model. I'm like, no, I'm not. And I left it right there. So if I want to engage in it, I will. If I don't, I won't. But now, today, I am Dr. Jada Jackson, the licensed mental health counselor who used to be a fashion model.
So let's unpack that, because in some life, that could actually serve as like what we would call like a microaggression to some degree. You hear people say to ladies, you're too pretty to frown, you should look this way or that way. So how does that make you feel when people see you and they think that you are a model and you immediately go to, no, I have this degree or that degree? I'm not assuming that you say that, but what's typically your response?
I understand it now. It used to really get under my skin because it took people who knew me a long time to recognize that I did have a master's degree, probably before they knew I had a master's degree. They saw me on, the magazine or in the magazines or on certain magazine covers or even walking certain runways. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I feel that I've been blessed with was the opportunity to get a good education and, take that journey down the road of helping people. So they did not know that. So initially, when I first got licensed, I asked all of my colleagues and all of those, my director, I said, stop telling people that I was a fashion model. And they couldn't help it. They were like, oh, she used to work for Ebony Fashion Fair. And I would pull them aside and I said, stop telling them that, because I'm really struggling with getting people to take me seriously, because they immediately see, she's the fashion girl, she's the beauty girl. And it's unfortunate that our society labels, that the beauty industry and those who work in the beauty industry as less academic or maybe not as smart or proficient. And I take offense to that, on many levels. So it took me a long time. However, I'll tell you where the table turned, Dr. LaMarr, and that was I had one of the older women that was in my cohort for my clinical degree, and she pulled me aside and she said, Jada, stop apologizing for being beautiful. And I just looked at her for a minute, and she said, it seems like you're grasping to find the space to have a voice that's void of what people are looking at when they see you. And I said, I know, I struggle with it. And so we talked about it, and I said, you know what? Okay, yeah, I was a model. And not only was I a model, in my industry, I was a supermodel, and that's what I was labeled, and that's okay. And so then I started using it.
I kind of picked up on that. I was reading all the information about you, but one thing that sort of stood out, because I'm a serious researcher when I bring folks into the bomb shelter, and one thing that I noticed, I read, you said, I've given my life, the good and the bad, the ups and the downs, as a vehicle to serve others and honor God. It's that simple, and I'm grateful. Close quotes. What role does faith play when it comes to your career?
Everything. I mean, everything. If I told you how I got to where I am today, you'd say, okay, the windows of heaven opened up and just showered down blessings on you. And I don't take that for granted in no sense of the word, because I grew up in the church. My mom was a strong proponent. I mean, she advocated for our faith, both me and my sister. And my mom is still very strong. My mom was somewhat of a minister in our church, and she just held a lot of power. And we watched that, and we watched her faith, and it just meant everything for me. So when I decided to even take the fashion journey, I was just like, you know what? My church is not going to appreciate this. They're going to call me Jezebel. They're going to say that I'm, living outside of the will of God. And I was so fixated on what people were going to think of me. And that cloud hovered over me for quite some time. But I'll tell you, there was a time where, and I did kind of, I don't want to say step away, but to some degree stepped away. And I was like, oh yes, this is awesome. I get to travel the world. And I kind of did, the most. But then my faith was like, knock, knock, knock. Don't forget, God is still here. And you are a vehicle, and you are only where you are because I have a greater purpose and work for you. Now, you can calm down, humble yourself, and get back on track so I can do the work, or you're going to find yourself sitting on the side of the road somewhere. So my faith is everything, and I believe that everything that God has given me, it's for a purpose, and I use it in that way.
So speaking of faith, we're going to talk about another F word, which is fear, because one of the things that I noticed from reading all the information that was sent to me, I did on my own. You talked about overcoming fear. How has Jada moved past fear in her life, and what were some of the strategies that you?
Absolutely. I think there was a time in my life where I was afraid of a lot of things. I grew up in a domestic violent home, and even though my mom was very strong in the faith, my dad was not. And, we watched a lot of violence in our homes, and I call myself a survivor of domestic violence, so I grew up very fearful. And, if a door would close, I'd jump, or if someone would scream, I'd jump. I had this trauma reaction to my childhood. And then as a counselor, one of the things I work with my clients is dealing with adverse childhood experiences. And those experiences oftentimes cause trauma. And for me and my sister and even my mom, one of the things we dealt with was not only living in poverty, but living, like I said, in a violent situation. So I think that I wasn't as prepped and developed the way that I needed to be as a child because of how we grew up. So it took me a long time to kind of get focused and figure out what is it I want to do, or what has God called me to do. And so I took that into every aspect of my life almost, fearful in going out and getting jobs, and fearful of being in relationships, or fearful of not being loved, or, there even came a time as I transitioned from Florida to Dallas, I was like, okay, now I'm fearful of, grieving, or, grieving my unlived life. It's just all of these things. And so one thing that has really helped me is to always go back to, what have I been called for? And if I do believe it's something that God has called me to do very definitively, then I do it afraid. And I've had a lot of those moments in the last few years because I have some really big projects coming up. And I just said, Lord, am I ready for this? And he just spoke to me. He said, yeah, you're ready. You've been doing this for a long time, and you're ready. And I went to my pastor, and I said, I'm afraid. He was like, girl, you ain't got time to be afraid. This is an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the pastor. So do you have any of those reminders, any visual reminders around your space? If I were to walk into your space, would I see some of those reminders that remind you why you were called to do this work? And do you encourage or suggest that other people do those things as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sitting in my office right now, and if you were sitting in my office with me, you'd see an entire wall that is dedicated to my vision. And I encourage, when I do my women's groups, when I do my basketball groups, I encourage everyone to write the vision, make it plain.
Quoting that scripture, go ahead. Don't let the size 10 shoe fool you. I will quote some scriptures all the way from the Bay Area. I will also quote all the Bay hip hop artists that are out there, Too Short and everybody else. E40, the E40 Too Short. That's the whole Bay Area folks.
That is my fault.
I know you got a little. Yeah. I know you got a couple of Too Short E40 quotes in you, but we're gonna keep it spiritual. You talked about your journey, growing up in a household that was very, very toxic. What are some of the most important lessons you've learned along your journey, either leaving the Bay Area, then traveling, or maybe some lessons you learned while you were in the situation that you were in that you can share with our listeners?
I think the biggest lesson for me, the greatest lesson that I've learned to lock into. And I don't want to say this because a lot of times people are like, oh, you're going spiritual, but this is my biggest lesson, and that is that I genuinely have to lean on what God has given me internally. And what I mean by that, and I'll give you an example, just being who I am has never been enough in my eyes. But when I would talk to other people, they'd say, oh, Jada, you're great, or oh, you did a great job, or oh, Jada, you're this. But it was never enough. I always second-guessed myself. And so when I got the call to go to L.A. to tape this new television show, I said, God, I'm going. And if the door opens, great. If it closes, I'm okay with that too. But I want your will to be done. So it's me stepping out on faith. So when I got there and I said, okay, I'm just going to go in and do me. I'm not, no pretense, no manipulation, no attempting to try and be something that I'm not. What you are going to get is the true and exact. And if you accept it, great. And if you don't accept it, that's cool too. But I'm going to do me.
Where does that
and that's
drive
exactly
come
what
from?
I did.
Where does that drive come from?
It came from my relationship with God. It really did. But it came from a lot of me, falling down and skinning my knee up and having to be picked up. But it's recognizing that people are going to talk. People are not going to be happy. You can't please everybody all the time. And I think that just in our careers, in our professional lives, in our personal lives, in our marriages, we get caught up in trying to please other people, without recognizing that the reality is people can't be pleased. And the sooner we understand that, the sooner we can get on about God's business. And I've realized that, I actually have something that is not only valuable, but it's necessary for the period of time that I'm in right now. And so I can either allow God to use me as a vehicle so that I can touch lives, and I mean genuinely, authentically, as deep as I can touch someone so that their lives might increase or be that much better. So to me, that's what gives me fulfillment. And that was my biggest lesson.
So how is your view of God changing because of the taking? Because you think about the God that you had when you were in San Francisco, now the God that's in Dallas, and now the God that's in L.A. How has God changed because of these?
Well, the good thing is he's the same yesterday to that's what I was going to say. Yeah, my view of him is that he's merciful, gracious, and kind. And actually, I feel all emotional all of a sudden because I think that there have been so many decisions that I've made in my career that was very self-seeking and self-serving. And I've done some incredible things, and I continue to do incredible things, but now I do it just a little bit differently. When I go in, I envision, I'm a huge advocate of meditation and guided imagery and, prayer and really seeking. So everything I prayed before, having this interview with you, and I continue to do that in whatever I do because I recognize that it's really not about me. It's really not. I used to think it was about me, but it's really not. And I think that's a level of maturity that takes place in all of us. And as we recognize that we have to continue to grow from glory to glory and from grace to grace, that we realize that really is not about us.
You talk a lot about faith, and when you talk about success, so what would you say are some of the other essential principles for success in the field that you've actually chosen, or the field that chose you?
Absolutely. I think that relationships are important. The people that we connect to and the people that we set up or erect boundaries, how we engage with people, our connectivity, it matters. And I learned it the hard way, but I thought that I could help everybody. I thought that I could bring everybody in and, give people jobs and just do. But I soon found out, and I found it out the hard way, is that sometimes we want more for other people than they want for themselves. So certain relationships can be toxic. And I like to call it, the mathematics of relationships. Is a person adding to you? Are they subtracting from you? Are they dividing, who you are? Are they causing an incongruence? Being able to recognize the people who contribute to you and there's some form of reciprocity is important. And unfortunately, when we are insecure and we're unable to have a locus of control that is more focused on our internal abilities, then externally we're constantly looking for other people to give us what we need. And the moment we fall into that trap, then, we're susceptible to everything that comes externally. So relationships are important. As you know, it's one of our number one needs that we have. And if we're wise in how we choose the people that come into our personal space, then I think we prosper.
Well, talking about people coming to our space, I see the individual who did the intro or the foreword of your book by the name of Les Brown, Mamie Brown's baby boy. I love Les Brown.
Yes.
I got a real true Les Brown story. So my last year in college, I've never won anything on the radio. And I called the local station in Chicago, and I won a weekend with Les Brown, which was crazy, to speaking for a living, because you put it out to you put it out to the universe, and it comes back, and so it definitely came back. So I get a chance to hang out with Les Brown for the entire weekend. And so before I go there, my cousin reminded me, and every time I see Les Brown, it's funny I bring this up. My cousin Karen Mayo introduced Les Brown to Gladys Knight, and they wound up getting married. So I ran into him. It was so cool. So when I met him, they were married at the time. But when I ran into him in the airport, because doing this work, you run into people all these different places. And I said, "Yeah, you remember me, LaMarr Darnell Shields from Chicago?" Yeah. I said, "Karen Mayo's my cousin." "Yeah." I said, "She was the one that hooked you and Gladys Knight up." Man, he made this face. He'll never forget me, because every time I see him, I'm gonna bring that up. So, outside of Les Brown, who are some of the people who personally influenced you towards to be successful?
Wow, I have so many. So most of my mentors are kind of in the background, but one of my mentors in Virginia Beach when I was attending Regent is Pat Robertson. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the founder of Regent University and the 700 Club.
Oh, yeah. And I'm like, Pat Robertson. I thought you were about to say somebody else I did not know. Yes, of course I know who he is.
Yes. So he poured into me unlike anyone when I was in my, I think it was my master's program. I was finishing up my master's program there, and he was very influential in getting me into television, and I will never forget that. Someone else is Pat Williams, who was the vice president of the Orlando Magic down in Florida, very instrumental in kind of speaking and pouring into my life as well. Gosh, I could go on and on. Oprah Winfrey, obviously.
Yeah, I saw that Oprah photo, homegirl, and that was not Photoshopped.
It was not Photoshopped. I just feel like that has been, spoken to my life. And I've had other, there are a lot of celebrities that I've had a chance to be mentored by and also engage with, but those people were really, really great. But at the same time, it was my professors who I am still in contact with now, and the people who are on the ground level of my, I'm sorry, can you hear my dog barking?
Yeah,
I know you're going to edit this, right? You good? Okay. So it was my, some of my professors, even now, like when I talk about this event or this show that I had that I just did the pilot for a couple of months ago, I called my professors and I was like, hey, I need to do a FaceTime with you and just process through some of this and what I'm thinking. And I think it's always good to have people in your life that you can call on and say, hey, I need to talk about this. I also have a business coach, and Dr. Stacia Pierce has been extremely influential in building my brand and teaching me how to maximize, my abilities and my value. So that's been awesome.
Yeah, so speaking of Oprah, Brendan Burchard, who I love, the author of High Performance Habits, How Extraordinary People Become That Way, he says that Oprah starts every meeting with 3 questions because high performers seek clarity. Clarity isn't something high performers get, but rather it's something they seek. The 3 questions that Oprah typically asks when she starts her meeting is, what is our intention for the meeting? What's important and what matters? How important are questions in your field?
Oh, very important. Asking the right questions can unlock so much potential. It can unlock emotion. It can unlock trauma if you ask the right question and go down the right road. So always being willing to ask questions. And I think that goes back to how we communicate. One of the things I teach when I do my executive trainings is active listening, because really we're a people who love to talk. Most of us love to talk about ourselves, but if we would listen, and once the question is asked, what do people have to say? What does someone else have to say? And you get to the core of what the true intentions are. And once you have an understanding of true intentions, you can sort through the strategy in order to get to the ultimate goal and objective. So I think it's very important to ask the right questions.
Well, speaking of goals and objectives, I know you have a very, very busy day and a very, very busy schedule. And my listeners want to know, how do you maintain productivity throughout the day? Like, what are some apps that you use? What are some things that you do to move throughout the day? Because you're carrying a whole lot. So tell us, what do you do to maintain productivity?
Well, I hired a team, first of all. So, but it's helpful for me because I do have so many irons in the fire that I have people who are able to do the small things that maybe are not necessary for me to do. So I have learned to delegate and make sure that everything is taken care of. I'm a list kind of person, so I'm going to always have the to-do list, and I'm going to do that the night before just to make sure I don't miss anything. And just sidebar on don't miss anything. I had 3 different calendars going on. One was my NBA calendar where I was traveling with the teams. And then I also had my speaking engagements and then my therapy that I do for my clients. And I missed something, and I ended up leaving Minneapolis and going back to Dallas when I actually had a speaking engagement for the NBA in Minneapolis. So I had just gotten really confused on my calendars, but I was like, you know what? I need to hire somebody to manage my calendars. So I thought I could do it, but when I got to that level where I had a lot of moving parts, I recognized that I have to bring someone in to help me with that. The other thing that I use is Asana. It's a project management app, and I just like to put all of my projects in there for all of my employees, and if they're helping me to do something, I can track whether or not they did it or where we are in the process, how we're progressing, and that helps me out.
Well, we know you do a whole lot of stuff. Whole lot. If you don't know, she does a whole lot of stuff, but good stuff. But I want to know, what do you most love about what you do? Out of all the things you do, what do you most love?
That moment of watching my client or my group that I'm facilitating have an aha moment or have a moment of clarity where, watching them go from being stuck to unstuck. that is probably what I love the most about what I do.
So, people look at your success, they look at all the things that you've done, L'Oreal, Disney, Walmart, and you just talked about the excitement of watching your clients get unstuck. Can you share with us a moment where you were stuck, where you felt like that everything was falling apart? And what did you do in that moment to sort of bring yourself back? And what strategies can you provide to our listeners to really help them? Because again, we look at the celebrity of all these folks that come onto these shows, but we need to hear some of those stories about, like, when I hit rock bottom, this is what I did. I went back home. I wanted to listen to some Kirk Franklin, but I decided to turn on some Too Short because I'm from the Bay Area. So what did you actually do?
First of all, I do have my moments. I believe that we can enjoy all music, first of all. But yeah, I mean, I love having fun. I have a really great group of friends that are helpful as well. But I'll say that when I transitioned from Ebony to going into television and getting hired on as a clinical psychotherapist, that was an incredible transition. It was one of the most difficult transitions in my life, because not only was I going through a transition with my career, I was going through a transition with my marriage, because I was going through a divorce, and that was very, very tough. And I think that, and it's something that I've been very transparent about, because as a therapist and as a Christian, divorce was never on my list of things to do. It wasn't on my bucket list, but it happened, and there was a lot of shame surrounding it. And I really thought that, God, you didn't work with me through this. Like, why is my marriage crumbling, and why can't I salvage it? And I realized in that moment that I was completely stuck, because I couldn't go back, and I was having difficulties moving forward. And number one, I had to enlist kind of my A-team. And that A-team consisted of, like, my ride or die girlfriends who I could tell anything to. And I could be angry and mad and depressed and all of those things with no judgment or condemnation. And then still, stand up and move forward without, feeling additional shame. Because, when you go through things in your life, there's already a struggle there. But so I would say having a strong, tight-knit support system, and then also having a strategy. Once we go through certain things, we definitely have to be willing to say, okay, I've grieved, I've gone through all the stages of grief, and now it's time for me to move on. What is that going to look like? And so I pulled away and spent some time just with myself, and I mentioned it earlier, write the vision. What does my life look like from here? And I try to dream as big as I possibly can. And then once I do that, I go, okay, it's in your hands, Lord. Now I'm just going to wait and see what direction we go.
Yesterday, I went to see a one-man show about Donny Hathaway called Twisted Melody. It's an amazing show. And I interviewed the writer and star of the show, Kelvin Roston, portrays Donny Hathaway. And for those that don't know, Donny Hathaway had the most beautiful voice. When you think of somebody like Stevie Wonder, was there, but Donny Hathaway had these demons. Donny Hathaway he was being attacked. He had schizophrenia, and he thought that he was being in his world. He wasn't, and of course, eventually, he committed suicide. But the entire play, Jada, was in the hotel room that he was in New York City prior to him, jumping out of the. He talked about Roberta Flack and his relationship with his wife, and of course, he talked about his daughter Layla Hathaway. And I know you are a psychotherapist, and of course, being a person of color like myself, our community, in particular, peoples of color, struggle with that conversation when it comes to talking about mental health. Can you speak on that a little bit for those listeners that might be struggling with that, and or who have family members that might be struggling with it?
Absolutely. There's a stigma when you think about a diagnosis of depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, as you just mentioned. the first thing people think is that person's crazy or there's something wrong with that person. I think furthermore, the gatekeepers to a lot of this stigma are the families who, once they realize there's something wrong with a child or a family member, they want to protect that family member from any additional backlash, but they're also protecting themselves from the backlash because, most diagnoses and mental health issues are genetic. So you have a situation where there's kind of this double layering of protection because no one wants to have a family known to have mental health problems or issues. More so even in the faith community, we don't talk a lot about mental health and mental wellness in the churches. Just in the last few years, I've talked to different pastors who have said, now I think we need to start talking about emotional and mental wellness because people are really struggling. Well, I think there are a lot of faith-based initiatives that are causing a lot of the mental health challenges as well. And I know that's not a popular statement, but when you require people to live a certain life, then what happens is when they can't do that, they start to pretend. And when you start to live a life of false pretense, then you have to enter into some form of manipulation and mental fantasy and cognitive dysfunction in order to save face. And when you're talking about saving face, and then you will have the depression and the anxiety. And so, it's this vicious cycle. One of the things I like to do is just really tear down the wall of stigma for mental health because I say everybody needs therapy. And I mean everybody. Not therapy in the context of you have a mental health issue and, your whole family has a mental health issue. No, everyone needs someone to talk to. We can't be an island to ourselves. We should be able to talk about the challenges that we're having in our everyday lives. So and I'll give you a quick example. When I moved from Florida to Texas, that was a normal transition. And with that transition came some anxiety for me. And I was trying to figure out what's going on and what am I feeling? Well, I've been moved out of my normal place of functioning and, my comfort zone. And now I'm in a completely new space and I'm having to function and produce. And it's all very new for me. That's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think what we start to do is label these standard phase of life issues like getting a divorce or having a baby or transitioning from high school to college or from college into the adult life or, getting married, whatever that is. Those are normal phase of life challenges and transition.
Wow. So that is a great way to wrap up this section of sound bombing. Your message is resonating with me, resonating with, and as I think about the interview I just did with Kelvin, who does an amazing job of portraying the life of Donnie Hathaway. He did a talk back yesterday and he had a mental health practitioner. It just shows me that there's so many of us that are dealing with these issues. And, of the church, of course, many of the churches have dropped the ball when it comes to that. I know recently when I was discussing with some educators, for the first time a few years ago, researchers say, Facebook can cause depression. You have social media depression. And they're now starting to see the research and data to support that. And so you hit everything. Before we go to the sound bombing question, how can my listeners get in contact with you?
Well, first of all, follow me on Instagram at Dr. Jada Jackson. That's DR and then my first and last name, Dr. Jada Jackson. And then my website is jadajackson.com. And for anyone who is looking for counseling, they can also go to totallifecounseling.com.
Well, this is my favorite part of the show. This is my favorite part of sound bombing. where I get to ask my amazing guests these what we call the super bomb questions. Now, these questions are going to be somewhat different from the questions that I asked earlier. But the difference between these, they have to be rapid fire. So I'm going to ask you the question. The very first thing that comes to your head, you respond. All right. Do I have that, Dr.
Okay.
Jada Jackson? You ready? All right.
Go.
What's your favorite word?
Reframe.
What's your spirit animal?
Lioness.
What are you reading right now?
Secrets of Closing the Sale by Zig Ziglar.
What are you listening to?
I am listening to Devon Franklin's Hollywood Commandments. Hollywood Commandments.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift?
Strength Finder 2.0, because I think everyone should know what their strengths are and maximize those strengths.
What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
My education.
What sound would you like to leave?
Did you say sound? SOUND?
S-O-U. What sound would you like to leave?
Oh gosh, that's the only one I'm hesitating. Okay, love. I'll go with love.
The sound of love.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to thank Dr. Jada Jackson for joining me in the bomb shelter. Listen, folks, you need to go online. You need to Google this young lady who's doing some amazing, amazing things. She is about to take over the world with some amazing projects that are coming down the pipe. And then also pick up some of her amazing books. We just talked a little bit today, but I want you to go online and check out the great things that she's doing.
I think you did a fantastic job, and I like the direction that you went. So, yeah, thank you.
No.
And you let me talk about my spiritual, my faith, and I love that. Sometimes I can't do that in the counseling world and when I'm talking about mental health. So I appreciated that.
I'm not sure why you're thanking me, because I feel like I was the one that received an amazing gift today. So I want to thank you personally for your transparency, and thank you for joining me in the bomb shelter today. And I would also like to thank my producer, Michael Harrison, and Supremacy for our theme music, and all of you who are listening. And as always, believe that something wonderful is about to happen, and that some people miss the message because they're too busy looking for the mess. Thanks for tuning in, and do something for someone other than yourself today. You've been listening to Sound Bombing.